The phone record clip shows the flaps were not extended. The landing gear still down.
Why the ram air turbine were active.
A Boeing 787 Dreamliner took off from Ahmedabad on what should have been a routine flight to London. 34 seconds later, it fell out of the sky straight into a crowded student hostel. No storm, no warning, just silence and then impact. Over 270 lives lost. But here's what will leave you speechless. The only surviving footage captured something under that plane that should never have been there. And when you see what it was, you won't believe it. 34 seconds to disaster. So, how does a $300 million airplane take off and then crash in just 34 seconds? The aircraft in question, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner operating as Air India Flight AI-171. On June 12, 2025 at exactly 1:38 in the afternoon, the plane took off from Ahmedabad's Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport. Weather crystal clear, visibility perfect. No turbulence, no mechanical red flags, nothing out of the ordinary. But before the passengers could even take their seat belts off, it was over. The plane crashed into the hostel canteen of BJ Medical College, right in the heart of the Meghaninagar neighborhood. This is a densely packed residential zone. 270 lives were lost, including students on the ground. The only person who walked away was a man named Vishwas Kumar Romesh, seated in 11A, right beside the emergency exit. At first, officials chalked it up to mechanical failure. But the black box told another story. Because here's the catch. This plane wasn't just unlucky. It had a long history of issues. Back in 2021, it suffered a fuel leak mid-flight and was forced to land in Ankara. Later came cracked windshields, overheating batteries, and even a full cabin electrical shutdown. And yet, every time the aircraft was patched, cleared, and sent back into the sky, a passenger on board that very morning, Akash Vats, recorded a short clip before takeoff. In the video, the AC was sputtering, screens were frozen, and seat remotes were dead. His caption read, "This bird shouldn't be in the air." Just hours later, that bird was gone. So what really happened in those 34 seconds? Why did every system, electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic, fail at once? The truth starts to unravel once you look at what the plane had been through in the months leading up to that moment. Its last heavy maintenance was nearly 2 years earlier. One engine was patched in March and the other inspected in April. The next scheduled full check was not until December, 6 months after the crash. Now, the question on everyone's mind wasn't just what failed. It was why no one caught it in time. And that brings us to what was supposed to be just another day in the sky. A day that would expose the cracks beneath an industry built on checklists and trust. Because when Flight AI-171 taxied to the runway, nobody knew what was waiting just seconds after takeoff. Routine until it wasn't. By all appearances, this flight was routine. But it turns out routine can be deceptive, especially when the cracks are hiding in plain sight. Before it took off for London, Flight AI-171 had already completed 2 legs that same day. First from Paris to Delhi, then Delhi to Ahmedabad. That's a tight schedule for any aircraft, let alone one with a record of past malfunctions. Refueling began at 12:20 that afternoon, expected to take 30 minutes, but it ran for 42. Officials would later say that's normal for a full-capacity long-haul trip. But some found the delay strange, especially because everything else from boarding to pushback felt rushed. 230 passengers, 10 crew members, 2 pilots. Captain Sumit Sabharwal brought more than 8,000 hours of flight time. His co-pilot Clive Kund had around 1,000. At 1:31, they taxied toward runway 23, the airport's only major runway, surrounded on all sides by tightly packed buildings. By 1:34, they were cleared for departure. And at exactly 1:38 and 24 seconds, the Dreamliner lifted off. 11 seconds later, it hit 625 feet, then it just stopped climbing. A single distress call came through. Then silence. 1:39 and 13 seconds. That's when the plane nose dived straight into the hostel canteen. In those final seconds, 35 students were having lunch. The blast was so violent that nearby residents thought it was an earthquake. Flames tore through windows, Walls collapsed. Smoke blanketed the block. But amid the chaos, one phone recording told investigators something they hadn't expected. A teenager named Aryan had been filming the takeoff, standing on a rooftop with friends. His footage would later reveal critical clues. The plane's landing gear still down. And even more alarming, the flaps were not extended. For anyone unfamiliar, flaps are critical for liftoff. They help the aircraft gain lift. Typically, the landing gear is retracted first. Flaps follow later once cruising altitude is achieved. But Aryan's video showed the opposite. The flaps were in. The gear was out. The plane never stood a chance. And there was one more thing caught on camera. A small spinning object under the belly. Investigators recognized it immediately. A ram air turbine known as the RAT. This device only deploys in a total power loss. No engine thrust, no electrical system, no hydraulics. It's the aircraft's last gasp. A mechanical windmill that uses outside air to generate emergency power. So why was it out during takeoff? Then came Vishwa's statement, the sole survivor. He remembered hearing a loud pop. The lights dimmed and everything went silent. That moment of silence would become the loudest clue investigators had. Sabotage, system failure, or something worse. See, for a Dreamliner to deploy its RAT, something catastrophic has to happen. The engines, electrics, and hydraulics must all fail. And that's exactly what the footage suggested. So now investigators had to ask the uncomfortable question, how does a next-generation aircraft lose all power just seconds after liftoff? To answer that, you need to understand what powers this bird. The Boeing 787 runs on an advanced electrical system. At the heart of it are variable frequency starter generators, or VFSGs. These supply power to nearly everything. Flight controls, navigation, lighting, communications. If one generator fails, the auxiliary power unit kicks in, but the APU takes 90 seconds to start. Flight AI-171 didn't have 90 seconds. It had 34. So what could shut down everything at once? One theory rose to the top. Fuel contamination. Jet fuel is highly refined, but it's fragile. Contaminants like water, rust, or microbial growth can clog filters and starve engines of oxygen. In 2019, a Japan-bound Dreamliner lost engine thrust midair from this exact issue. Luckily, that flight had altitude. AI-171 didn't. Now, here's where it gets serious. On the day of the crash, the plane was filled with a fuel mix from 3 different suppliers. Indian Oil, Hindustan Petroleum, and Reliance. That's not illegal, but it does increase risk. Each supplier processes, stores, and transfers fuel differently. Cross-contamination can happen during pipeline switches, tanker deliveries, or airport tank transfers. And here's the twist. Ahmedabad Airport had already flagged microbial growth in its fuel storage tanks earlier that year. A cleanup was planned and delayed. Whether that delay played a role in this tragedy is still debated, but the timeline is chilling. Now take it one level deeper. Before every flight, technicians are supposed to visually inspect the fuel for color, clarity, and water content. If it's cloudy, it gets flagged. But what if that step was skipped? Or worse, what if the results were forged? Because if that happened, this wasn't just negligence. It was systemic failure or possibly sabotage. It's rare, but it's not unheard of. In regions where political tensions simmer or internal airline conflicts run deep, fuel tampering has been used to target specific flights. A small amount of foreign substance in the tanks can seize engines without triggering early alarms. So now, investigators weren't just asking what happened mechanically. They were asking who had access to the fuel lines that day and what motive, if any, could justify bringing down an entire aircraft loaded with passengers. Because if it wasn't sabotage, it was a chain of ignored warnings that built up to something just as deadly. The Dreamliner's nightmare history. Even before the wreckage cooled, questions began swirling. Not just about this crash, but about the aircraft itself. Because this wasn't just any plane. This was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a jet once hailed as the future of air travel. Lightweight, efficient, packed with bleeding-edge tech. But behind the glossy promo reels was a history that painted a very different picture. Go back to 2013. Dreamliners around the world were being grounded. The reason? Fires. And not just once. Several planes reported lithium-ion batteries overheating midair. The global fleet was pulled from service. It was the first time in decades that an entire model line had been grounded. The issue was eventually resolved. But the pressure on Boeing didn't disappear. In fact, it grew worse. Demand was skyrocketing. Airlines wanted more jets fast. And Boeing needed a second production plant to meet that demand. Enter Charleston, South Carolina. The factory was built fast, staffed fast, and according to whistleblowers, shortcuts started stacking up just as fast. Former employees told a chilling story. Tools left inside fuselages, metal shavings near sensitive wiring, incomplete inspections rushed through to meet deadlines. One senior inspector even said, "If you gave me a free ticket on a Dreamliner built in Charleston, I wouldn't take it." Guess where Air India's ill-fated flight AI-171 was assembled? Charleston. And it doesn't stop there. Internal memos revealed a pattern. Planes with issues passing quality checks were being cleared anyway, especially when delivery deadlines loomed. Some airlines worried about quality control began demanding that their Dreamliners be built only at Boeing's Everett, Washington plant. Air India never made that demand. The very plane that crashed had a known track record. Cracked windshields, battery overheating, mid-flight fuel loss, flickering lights, frozen screens, issues that were patched but not deeply fixed. Each time it returned to service, another risk was layered onto the last. Some of those same issues are now used in training modules for aviation investigators as real-world examples of systems trying to warn us before failure. One expert put it plainly, passengers weren't complaining, the aircraft was. And it wasn't just this one plane. Weeks earlier, another Air India Dreamliner had suffered in-flight system failures on a London-Mumbai run. It landed, was inspected and returned to service within 24 hours. So when Flight AI-171 went down, those who knew the pattern didn't act surprised. Saddened, yes, but surprised, no. Because the question wasn't if something like this would happen. It was when. The survivor's account in his own words. You've heard the data. You've seen the footage, but none of it can fully explain the trauma like the voice of the one man who walked away. Vishwas Kumar Romesh, a British national. In the hospital days after the crash, Romesh spoke with a strange calm. Not denial, but something heavier. Like his soul hadn't caught up to what his body survived. He said the aircraft felt like it froze in the air for maybe 5 to 10 seconds. No vibration, just a sudden stillness. Then the cabin lights flickered, green and white, and a violent jolt of thrust threw everything forward. And then the drop straight down. He thought he was dead before they even hit the ground. The left side of the Dreamliner tore through the ground floor canteen of the BJ Medical Hostel like a blade. That side of the aircraft, where he was seated, took the full impact. But that same impact, it cracked open a door. That split-second destruction gave him something no one else got. A way out. He saw the opening. Instinct kicked in. No plan, no sound. He jumped. When responders found him, he was bleeding. His skin was scorched, but he was breathing. And he stayed conscious through it all. Doctors later said he was seconds away from being gone. That if he hadn't moved when he did, that gap in the fuselage would have sealed. He spent 5 days in the hospital, then unbelievably walked out on his own. But what the crash did to his body didn't even come close to what it did to his mind, because sitting beside him on that flight was his older brother, AJ. AJ didn't make it. Vishwas later carried his brother's coffin with trembling hands. At the funeral, he kept repeating one line like a broken clock. Even I can't believe how I came out of it alive. But it wasn't pride. It was guilt. The kind that follows you when every headline calls you the miracle survivor. Even Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited his bedside, not just to wish him recovery, but to acknowledge what he represented. Experts later explained that crash survival comes down to terrifying math. The angle of impact, the way the metal splits, the seatbelt pattern, it's not strategy, it's physics and chaos. And for Romesh, it was seat 11A. Right beside the emergency exit. Right where the fuselage split just enough to make a hole wide enough for one person. One jump, 1 second. That one movement turned him into something he never asked to be. A symbol not just of survival, but of how thin the line really is between a headline and a headstone. Everyone else on Flight AI 171 had their story ended mid-sentence, but Vishwas Kumar Romesh, he's still telling his, could this happen again? In the aftermath of the crash, one question echoed louder than any other. Could this happen again? The wreckage was cleared. The site where the hostel once stood became a memorial. But while the headlines faded, investigators kept digging. What they found pulled the curtain back on a problem much bigger than one flight. During an emergency audit by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, dozens of Dreamliners across India, not just Air India, showed something troubling. Minor faults logged not as safety issues, but as observation only. That's a loophole. One that allows planes to fly with unresolved problems as long as each one alone doesn't compromise flight safety. But here's the issue. Flickering cockpit lights. Observation only. Faulty air conditioning. Comfort issue. An engine sync code. Monitor performance. Individually harmless, combined lethal. This overlap is what experts call stacked failure exposure. Small problems piling up until they collapse the system like dominoes. And the oversight, it wasn't just technical, it was cultural. See, in 2019, a U.S. audit revealed that Boeing was self-certifying many of its safety tests. That's right. The same company building the planes was also checking its own homework. Whistleblowers warned it would backfire, but speed and profits took the front seat. One former engineer went further, pointing to a flaw nobody thought to notice. Electrical grounding wires twisted too tight, harmless on day one, damaging after repeated stress. These were little things that didn't make headlines until they did. In the cockpit, pilots are trained to speak up. But what if nobody's listening? Mechanics are trained to report faults. But what if the pressure says fix it later? That silence, the quiet nods, the unchecked boxes, the shrugged shoulders is where the next disaster begins. And in this case, it ended with a Dreamliner that was never supposed to fly becoming a flying coffin. One pilot anonymously wrote after the crash, "Flying a Dreamliner should feel like commanding a spaceship, but sometimes you feel like you're babysitting a ticking clock." And now, a message taped to the crash site wall says it all. He was supposed to be eating lunch. Instead, he became part of an avoidable tragedy. The black box answered how the crash happened, but why it happened and why no one stopped it still haunts everyone involved. And unless something changes, the next warning might come too late again. Could this have been prevented? Should the warning signs have grounded that flight for good? And most importantly, will it happen again? Let us know what you think in the comments. If stories like this make you question everything you thought you knew about air travel, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what's coming next might just shake your trust in the skies even more.